doing that.
I did start it.
Great. Thank you, Cecilia. Welcome everyone to activating feminine energy and spiritual practice. And to get started tonight, as usual, we'll just do a short meditation, give ourselves a chance to come into this space, focus our minds a bit, let go of whatever might be on our minds due to the day and what have you. And then we'll set our motivation together. So again, just spend the first few minutes doing a breathing meditation in whatever way suits your mind, working with the breath, with trying to keep your awareness with the breath. And whenever the mind wanders, then gently guide the mind back to the breath. So again, I'll just leave that up to you to do over the next few minutes, and then I will come in and lead you in a short reflection. Now let's set our motivation for tonight. We're going to be working with this idea of kind of two elements, two components in our spiritual practice, and focusing primarily on what we call the feminine aspect. As we'll go into shortly, this represents the wisdom side, which is really essential that we have that wisdom that helps us to achieve our own potential so we can help others to do this. So we'll remove everything that obscures our own minds. But in order for that result to happen, we have to have the other side that we're going to refer to as kind of a masculine side. And we're not saying these things are not separate, they work in tandem. But on that side of the equation, we have the method side of the path. This is where we set our motivation. Recalling compassion and loving kindness for all beings. The fact that every one of them is just like us and wanting to be happy, wanting to not suffer. And we generate that motivation of bodhicitta, the desire to achieve our own potential so we can help others. And when that is united with wisdom, with the feminine side, then we have everything we need to be able to accomplish that goal. Not just this compassionate motivation, the method side, that has to be there, but moreover the means to be able to accomplish that. You're practicing the wisdom of the Buddha. So set that motivation of bodhicitta so that what we do tonight in exploring this concept of feminine energy and spiritual practice becomes a cause for your own enlightenment to achieve the state of Tara Buddhahood, Buddha that we'll be discussing tonight. So we then can liberate all beings from suffering and lead them to the peerless bliss of enlightenment. And it's for this reason that we're gathered here tonight. Okay, good. Again, welcome everyone to tonight's class. Before we get into the Buddhist side of it, I've got a little bit of a slideshow again. I hope people don't mind the slides. I find them really quite useful in order to kind of organize my thoughts and keep me on track somewhat. Get the little clicker to work there. There we go. Click on that. Click on that. And I should be sharing. Okay, good. And let me do it from the current slide. So what I was going to say is before we get into the whole idea of the Buddhist perspective of this, I wanted to share something I found on the internet many years ago when I first did this talk. And it comes from a man named Shepherd Hoodwin, who I think is a channeler of some sorts. He channels some sort of being. And so, but it's just, it does correlate very nicely with the Buddhist thinking to some degree. And also, of course, correlates with what we know in our world around what we call sort of masculine energy and feminine energy. And by the way, giving it these titles isn't meant to like lock us into some sort of binary way of looking at gender or anything, because every person, regardless of what they consider their gender, has both of these energies, has them happening within them, and sometimes in balance, sometimes, heavier on one side, regardless of one's gender. These energies are there. So this is how Shepherd Hoodwin describes male energy. It's directed, focused, goal-oriented, productive, and outward thrusting. It corresponds with linear left brain thinking and with doing. So this is kind of how, if we look at our world, that we live in, this is that sort of energy that caused buildings to be built and rockets to the moon to, happen and what have you. That's the type of energy we're talking about. Not saying that only men did this again. We're saying that masculine energy is all about that type of stuff, kind of producing things, very goal-oriented, all about the outside and changing the outside to some degree, being affected in the outside. The way he looks at female energy is it's creative, process-oriented, unstructured, and inward drawing. It corresponds with circular, right brain thinking and more with being as opposed to doing. So we can see that that's, again, another dimension of us, and we can identify these two energies within ourselves and how they play off of each other. We have certainly times in our life where we're much more outward oriented and goal oriented and doing all these things. And then we have other times when we withdraw and have, a way of being that's a little more creative, a little more intuitive. We need both of those energies. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. We're seeing slide number 1.
Oh, this is happening again.
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Let me stop the share. If I get lost to you all, if somehow I get disconnected, then let me know. Well, I'll know probably. Okay, are you seeing the female energy slide now?
Yes.
Okay, so this was the male energy one. If I can, directed, focused, and so on. And then hopefully you're seeing that. And then the female energy. So again, this was just to give some context in terms of how these are spoken about in a more, spiritual dimension, but not necessarily Buddhist. What I want to do with tonight is to kind of talk about two topics. And the first one is going to be the shorter one of these two, because I do want to spend a fair amount of time going into the Buddha Tara. But the very first part of the presentation is looking at Sutra and Tantra presentations of male and female energy. So this is kind of a mirroring to some degree what we just saw, but talking about them more in the context of how are these two energies encapsulated in what we talk about as our path to enlightenment. So before I proceed, I'm actually going to try taking it offline and see if it works to go back again with the slides. But when we talk about Sutra and Tantra, just so everyone's clear, these are all within the context of Buddhist teachings, because the word Tantra is sometimes used in our culture to refer to teachings that come out of India that may not necessarily be Buddhist. And so I think it's important to understand that both the Sutra and the Tantric path were taught by the Buddha. of course, at various times and different times, and also in different environments. And so it's actually said that when the Buddha was teaching the more common sutra discourses, it was often a community of monks and what have you that were all gathered there. When he was teaching the tantric teachings, of course, these are only within the Mahayana, only for bodhisattvas. And so he was teaching those high-level bodhisattvas, and he was even teaching in a different physical form, which might kind of, raise some questions. But we're going to talk about this because as part of tonight, we're also talking about the culmination of our path, what it means to become a Buddha, which is the totality of those two energies, bringing those energies together. And Tantra has some unique ways for working with that I'm going to talk about tonight to give you all a bit of an introduction to Tantra. Certainly, Lama Yeshe's book, Introduction to Tantra, is a wonderful guide to help you to explore that further. But essentially, Sutra and Tantra differ in terms of how they approach things. Because the Sutra approach is much more kind of what they call exoteric, which means it's kind of not hidden at all. It's very obvious. Whereas the tantric teachings are esoteric and of course involve many different practices. And I'm not going to be going into any of that detail tonight. And some of you may have already been initiated into Buddhist Tantra, and so you know a bit about tantric practice. That's great. Those of you who haven't, hopefully tonight will also be a little bit of an invitation for you to consider exploring Buddhist Tantra at some point in your Dharma career. And I'll go into that as we go through tonight. But essentially, this is what we're going to be exploring is kind of the Sutra and Tantra perspectives on male and female energy. And then we'll, of course, get into Arya Tara, the wonderful green Tara, and her sort of the role that she plays on our spiritual path. So first, in terms of both of these approaches, hopefully you're seeing the slide now that says the goal in both Sutra and Tantra is unification, totality. Okay. So again, that's without a doubt what we're looking at. Sutra and Tantra are both Mahayana paths. They're both about getting to the goal of completely unifying these two forms of energy, completely experiencing a state of totality. In fact, I'm going to share a quote with you in a little bit from Lama Yeshe, where he talks about how so much of our problems is caused by being out of touch with that and not being whole, kind of being imbalanced, if you will. Now, in our culture, though, certainly we can say that feminine energy tends to need emphasis much more. And that's because if we look at the world that we live in, of course, we've lived with patriarchal societies to a large degree, yes. I mean, there are a few matriarchal societies in the world. They tend to embody masculine energy, male energy. And it's not, again, solely tied to male gender, but when you have patriarchal societies that are very much about all those sort of left brain things and accomplishing things and doing things and building things and what have you. I mean, we can say the topic we talked about last Thursday around climate change and so on, many of these problems come from a male energy problem perspective. That's how we got into this situation, is that there was too much of that kind of doing all these things without paying attention to how do we also use the more intuitive side of ourselves, also find that wisdom that can guide us in that sort of approach. So again, these are rough analogies for these things. I'm not saying this is an absolute kind of mirroring of these two, male and female energy, in regard to these, but nonetheless, we can see that those are both operative, and feminine energy tends to be needed in our world. We need that kind of wisdom that will come in and assure that what we're doing leads to actually the best results. Okay. So in the sutra presentation, let's go into that first. So we have two elements of the path. Again, there's a very much a dualistic kind of binary approach to all of this, and we're going to be using that throughout, this initial presentation. There's nothing really wrong with it. In the traditional teachings, they often talk about the two wings of a bird and us needing to have both wings intact in order to fly to the destination of enlightenment. So let's take a look at these two elements. First, I'm using Rinpoche's terminology here. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, in recent teachings, he's been using the idea of merit of wisdom and merit of virtue. Sometimes we call the second of these just merit, but he says they're both merit. They're both meritorious things that we engage in. Merit of wisdom is the one side of the path that we absolutely need. That's the feminine side. That's what we're going to be primarily exploring tonight. And in its sutra presentation, this is the transcendental wisdom realizing emptiness. I'll talk about emptiness a little bit more tonight. But essentially, this is that kind of fundamental wisdom that needs to be developed. in order to remove all of the obscurations, in order to help us to become a Buddha. But if that is done without the other wing, the wing of method, compassion, what Rinpoche calls merit of virtue, which is here equated with masculine. And by this, again, we're not saying that men are more compassionate. We're saying that that masculine energy gets tied with the method side, with the doing side, with the being active in the world side. And sometimes that is together with the pure motivation of compassion. Sometimes it's not in our world. Masculine energy and feminine energy can sometimes both go askew. We're not talking about them in being some sort of pristine form, some pure form in our world, but rather these are the two driving forces, those that drive us externally outward and those that drive us more internally and looking at kind of changing things within. So in terms of merit of virtue, this masculine side, these are all the practices, as it says there, of generosity, morality, and so forth that are motivated by bodhicitta. Again, bodhicitta is what we just meditated on for our motivation for tonight. Most of you are familiar with that state of mind. It is the driving force, having been contemplated deeply, compassion and love for all beings, the wish to achieve their welfare, and the acknowledgement that to do that, we have to become a Buddha ourselves. So we can say that there's the wisdom wing again and the method side or the side of virtue. And without both wings, we'll never get to enlightenment. Most of you are familiar with this presentation. This is how the Sutra Path sets out very clearly those two kind of energies, again, that we're going to call feminine and masculine in terms of our approach tonight. In terms of the result, well, what happens is when you collect the merit of wisdom to the greatest degree, you have an accumulation of that to the highest degree, you then achieve what is called the truth body. Most of you know this term Dharmakaya. Dharmakaya is referring to one component of the Buddha's experience. When you become a Buddha, you have what I refer to here as the personal dimension, right? This is kind of your own kind of collection of all of that wisdom that results in your fully developed mind, your omniscient consciousness. So you'll notice I kind of put them in reverse order here on the previous slide. Oops, I did have that right. Oh, wisdom and virtue. Okay, sorry. So wisdom is the accumulation of all that feminine energy, that merit of wisdom that results in you having this perfected mind. Remember that state of Buddhahood is one where we have completely removed everything that obscures the mind through that wisdom realizing emptiness. But we have also fully developed all the qualities. Well, the development of all the qualities is the second side of it. That's the collection of the merit of virtue. When we accumulate that side of the path to the greatest degree, we then accomplish what's called the form body or the Rupakaya. And I call that the interpersonal or social dimension of a Buddha. So let's talk about these a little bit because we can correlate them to our own experience right now. Every one of us sitting in the room, sitting in the Zoom room, we all have two dimensions to our experience. We have our interpersonal dimension when we are talking with others, being with others, texting with others, whatever the case might be. But then we have our more personal dimension, which is when we are sitting quietly with our own thoughts. Often these are acting together too, right? We're with others, but at the same time, our sort of inner dimension is happening. And this is kind of our own private world, right? Nobody knows all of our thoughts unless we express them to others, unless we actually take the time to communicate them. Well, Buddhas have fully developed kind of their own personal experience. Their personal experience is no longer together with any form of delusion or mistake. It's completely without any of that. But of course, they need to be able to relate to sentient beings because they need that interpersonal dimension. Otherwise, how are they going to accomplish the goal of benefiting all beings, which is what bodhicitta is about? Again, bodhicitta said, I want to become a Buddha to benefit all beings. Well, then you need an interpersonal dimension to your experience. So the Buddhas have both dimensions the same way that we have both dimensions. It's just that their dimensions are perfected. They have a perfect way of knowing all things through their own personal side. The collection of wisdom has resulted in that. And then they have a perfect way of benefiting others in the world. And that's come about through the collection of their merit of virtue, of all of that kind of, again, masculine side of the path, all of that activity, being generous, being kind, patient, and so on with other beings. So we absolutely need to accomplish both of those. And that's what the Sutra Path is presenting, is the techniques for doing that, primarily through the 6 perfections. So we see that when we go back to this and correlate them to the 6 perfections, The perfection of wisdom is obviously the first one. And that's often supported too with the perfection of concentration, because you need to have a very focused mind developing that wisdom. But nonetheless, you also need, generosity, morality, patience, joyous effort, and so on. Those are the other perfections that are the merit of virtue, that are collected in order to achieve arupakaya. By the way, this word kaya that's being translated as body, just think of it again as a dimension of a Buddha's experience, because when we talk about the truth body, we're not saying it's a physical body, because it isn't. It's a consciousness, a fully developed consciousness that is omniscient and able to, have compassion and love for all beings imbued within it. But then that compassion and love and wisdom needs to manifest in the world in the form of these rupakaya. When we get to rupakaya, yes, those are form bodies. They are material. They are produced out of a Buddha's compassion in order for them to benefit others. Now, as I was saying, they do work perfectly for the welfare of others, but obviously they're thwarted to some degree by the karma of beings. So the Buddhas, as much as they are trying right now at this moment, all Buddhas are trying to get every one of us completely awakened. Well, it's no obstacle from their side. The obstacle is from our side. Karmically, we're not quite there yet. They often use the analogy of the Buddhas being like a sun shining. The sun's always shining, even after it sets here in the world, right? We are on the dark side of the planet right now because of the sun, the Earth turning. But, the sun's still there. It's shining. We're just obscured to seeing it right now, having the sunshine right now. So again, it depends upon the situation of beings as to whether they're in the full sun rays of the Buddhas or whether they're hidden under the rocks or in the caves or what have you. So everything from the Buddha side is being done perfectly. It's just a matter of our needing to be receptive to that, be in a place where we can benefit from that. Let's see if I can get the thing to, there we go. Okay. Let's talk about the tantric presentation. There's some kind of similar components, but there's a very different dimension to Tantra. I'm not going to be able to go into great depth on this, but it's important to hear a little bit about this. When we talk about the path, just as we talked about the path and the result with regard to sutra. Let's talk about the path in regard to these sort of two elements that are combined in the case of Tantra in one mind. In sutra, what happens is we often go back and forth. When we're sitting on our cushion meditating on emptiness, and that's one thing, but then we get up and we do all these activities of the bodhisattva and so on. We go back and forth. In Tantra, the whole key is to practice these in a single mind as much as possible. And the main way that we do this is what's called deity yoga. By deity, we mean a Buddha. So we're going to be talking about green Tara. You can be initiated into green Tara, and then that becomes your deity. And you visualize yourself in the form of that Buddha that will then be your resultant Buddhahood state. And then you cultivate it together with the wisdom realizing emptiness. And those two are always meant to be united. So when we look at the screen here, the wisdom component, the feminine side, is what's called path clear light. Clear light is referring to a very, very subtle form of consciousness. That's the value of the tantric path. It gets us down to the subtlest level of consciousness. That it is a non-conceptual mind. It's hard for us to even imagine what that's like because we're so caught up in our conceptuality. It's a form of mental consciousness that is absolutely pure and is without any sort of thoughts. That is the wisdom that we cultivate on the path in Tantra. Together with it is the path of virtue or method. That's the masculine side. And here on the path, it's called the impure illusory body. Again, I won't be able to go into great detail on what the illusory body is and all of that, but it's essentially the prototype, if you will, for the form body of the Buddha. So recall again, on the sutra path, you had the truth body, which is the culmination of this clear wisdom of realizing emptiness and the omniscient mind. And then you have the form bodies that are the culmination of all of your collection of merit and virtue. In Tantra, you have similar goals again, but you're getting to them slightly differently. It's not that you're abandoning the sutra path, you're using the sutra elements, but you're augmenting them with the tantric path, the practice of path clear light that is developing this very, very subtle wisdom energy that will allow you to achieve the Dharmakaya, together with your practice of deity yoga, visualizing yourself as a Buddha, and eventually that visualization becomes more real. Becomes what we call an illusory body. That illusory body is not as real as a Buddha's body yet in terms of hasn't fully developed, but you can then use that as a platform through which you can eventually achieve the form bodies of a Buddha. So let's go on to that element of it. Let's talk about what it looks like in terms of the result on the tantric element. So we have, again, the two elements of the result, which is the complete unification in this case of what we often refer to as non-dual wisdom together with great bliss. Non-dual wisdom, obviously related to the wisdom side, the feminine side. And that's the result clear light. It's not just the path clear light. You get to a resultant state where you're going to abide in that for eternity. You'll be abiding in the resultant clear light mind of a Buddha, which is their equivalent to the Dharmakaya. Again, the Sutra path doesn't present the clear light techniques for generating a truth body. Only in Tantra do we introduce that component. And once more, this is still that personal dimension of a Buddha. So there's no difference in terms of what they're aiming to achieve. It's just that on Tantra, you use the resultant clear light as the means for accomplishing the truth body. And then you'll notice that now it says pure illusory body. Why? Because you have removed the impurities in the mind that allow the pure illusory body to eventually become the form body. And this happens at a certain level of the path. Again, won't go into all the specifics, but then it becomes the sort of template through which your form body, your Rupakaya, will then be manifesting and continue to manifest in a variety of ways for sentient beings. And as we said before, that's your interpersonal or social dimension, right? So again, this is not different in terms of the result so much in terms of the elements. It's different in terms of how we get there and how we utilize these two energies. So this is kind of a precursor to what we're going to go into around Tara, because Tara is taught, although you might see references in the sutra kind of presentations, it's taught primarily as a tantric practice. And even if you haven't received any tantric initiation, it's useful to kind of get a handle on what's all involved in tantric practice with green Tara. These are the quotes from Lama Yeshe I mentioned, and it's going to be a few screens, but I thought it was better to share them on screen so we could read them. I could read them through and you can follow the words. And then you can certainly have copies of the slides at some point. Again, I'm going to make those available and can get them to folks who are interested in them. So Lama Yeshe says in this wonderful book, and anyone can read this book, even if you haven't had tantric initiation, he says, what we do not realize is that within each of one of us is an unlimited source of both male and female energy. So many of our problems arise because we are either ignorant of or we suppress what we have within us. Men try to hide their female side and women are afraid of expressing their male energy. As a result, we always feel cut off from something we need. Again, he's saying this in a very general way, because you do tend to have a predominance of masculine energy in men and a predominance of feminine energy in women. But don't get too caught up in, again, genders being assigned to this, because you can have many women who are much more in touch with the masculine side as well, and you have many men who are much more in touch with their feminine side. So don't think in absolutes. But he says, as a result, we always feel cut off from something we need. And this happens regardless of whatever gender you identify yourself as. We do not feel whole and therefore turn expectantly toward other people for the qualities missing in ourselves in the hope of gaining some sense of completeness. And again, just think about your own experiences with relationships and whatever in your life. Sometimes that is what guides people, is to kind of find their other half, right? Find something that fulfills them and fills in what they don't have. As a result, much of our behavior becomes contaminated by insecurity and possessiveness. In fact, all the problems in the world, from one person's anxiety all the way to warfare between nations, can be traced to this feeling of not being whole. It's kind of an interesting observation. I don't know what people feel about that, but if we say that from a tantric perspective, this is what's going on, is we're out of balance. And people are not able to hold those two in balance and to really work from this place of both wings functioning. You know, sometimes the kind of compassionate motivation, being in the world, doing all these things, doesn't stay in touch with wisdom. And we end up doing things, and again, I could point to climate change we talked about last Thursday as the result of that, right? Because, well, yes, it's good that people have, you know, food and energy and cars and all the things, you know, there can be some, even we could say some compassionate motivation to having those things in our world, right? Because they allow us to have much convenience and to have lives that are more leisurely and what have you. But if you do them unwisely, we end up with results in our world that don't look so good because we're out of touch with keeping things in balance. I think Lama Yeshe, who, of course, he wasn't living at the time when we were, commonly talking about climate change and what have you, passed away in 1984. But I think he would agree that everything we see happening in our world in terms of the environment is a product of us not being whole, not being able to hold both energies in balance. Tantra provides powerful methods for getting in touch with our essential wholeness. Tantric art is filled with potent symbols of the unity and completeness characteristic of our fully realized potential. And here what he's referring to is the tantric art that you'll see sometimes, what we tend to call in Tibetan yabyom. Yabyom is signaling the male and female together in union, which of course many people might misinterpret, as he says. The image of male and female deities in sexual embrace, taken by some early Western interpreters of Tibetan Buddhism as a sign of its degeneration, is actually a symbolic portrayal of the inner unification of our own male and female energies. So those of you who, are familiar with some of these images, have seen them and what have you, they're meant to be used primarily within the context of tantric practice, because when you do take certain levels of tantric practice and tantric initiation, highest yoga, tantra, what have you, then you do start to generally work with the idea of those two figures united. But you are both of those figures. You are not just playing the role of one. You are that's in line with your identified gender or what have you. You're rather playing the role of both, the unification of both the feminine side of wisdom and the male side of method, virtue, what have you. Okay. So then Lama Yeshe says, on a deeper level, their embrace symbolizes the aim of the very highest tantric practices, generation of a most subtle and blissful state of mind that by its very nature is supremely suited to penetrate ultimate reality, emptiness, and free us from all delusion and suffering. This is really, again, it was said earlier, that we have this goal of unification of the wisdom realizing emptiness together with great bliss. In the tantric path, it becomes more about generating this blissful energy that allows you to unite that in a very cutting way, a very penetrating way, so that you can achieve the realization of that wisdom together with this blissful state. That's about all I'm going to say about that. Lama Zopa even sometimes doesn't even use the word bliss because he feels like it's important not to talk so much about that side of tantric practice. But once you are initiated, then of course you have free access to all of the teachings, complete access to the teachings on Tantra and the techniques. So he says, on this level, the male figure represents the experience of great bliss, while the female is the symbol of non-dual wisdom. Again, just how they're being symbolized in this yabyom figure, that symbolization. Thus, their union has nothing whatsoever to do with the gratification of the senses, that we normally, so people might look at it and go, wow, that's pretty wild out there, these two beings in sexual embrace. It's nothing to do with what we consider sexual embrace and refer to that in our culture, right? It rather indicates a totally integrated state of blissful wisdom that completely transcends ordinary sense desires. But keep in mind, the goal is absolutely the same. Whether we talk about sutra or whether we talk about tantra, you're trying to abolish desire. Again, desire being one of the afflictions. And of course, the primary root affliction of ignorance that's underneath all of our desire, underneath all of our anger, underneath all of the affliction. So we're going to go into this in a bit more detail, but know that the goal of Tantra isn't to take our desire in a diluted sense and, create great bliss from that place. Rather, we create bliss free of desire. That's why, again, we have the union of the wisdom realizing emptiness, which is the antidote to that ignorance that would be behind our desire, together with the energy of desire. This is really what we're talking about in Tantra, is using energies in the body. And I might just mention for people, don't have much experience around Tantra, tantric systems of looking at the physical body encapsulate the concept of energy flowing through the body, very similar to what we see in the yogic perceptions of like prana floating, like breath energy going through the body. Chinese medical systems are looking at qi, that is energetic pathways in the body. It's not identical, but it's the same sort of concept that we have energy in this body. We can harness that energy in a very intense way, bring it to the forefront, and unite it with this wisdom realizing emptiness. Then you have the perfect platform to be able to remove everything that defiles the mind. That's what Lama Yeshe was saying in that final slide. Again, he says here, it completely transcends ordinary sense desires and allows us to, get rid of all of that, get rid of our desire, get rid of the afflictions. Okay. So let's carry on now to the second part of tonight. Maybe I should see if there are any questions before we go on. Because otherwise we start talking about Tara and leave this all behind, and maybe people have questions on that. Any questions about that presentation of Sutra Tantra, the differences between those two? Might still sound a little esoteric, and maybe it's still meant to be if you haven't practiced Tantra, and that's okay. Anything? Yeah, Gracia.
Simple question. You said that the male was the represented bliss
Mhm.
and the female represented.
The non-dual wisdom. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think everyone heard that Graciela's question was, the male represents bliss, this great bliss, and then the female represents the non-dual wisdom realizing emptiness. Any questions from the Zoom room? Okay, then let's carry on. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look specifically at how feminine energy of Tara is encapsulated in tantric practice. Again, if I go back to my comment earlier, a lot of it had to do with the fact that we have all of this feminine energy that we're lacking in our world, right? And for many people, even people who consider themselves of the female gender, might feel like they're lacking a bit of that. So it's okay, we're trying to rectify things, but we're going to work with kind of Buddha, the Buddha Tara, or Arya Tara, as she sometimes is called, as a means to activate our feminine energy. Because regardless of your gender, and regardless of how much you might feel in balance or not, we all have to activate our feminine energy to that greatest degree. That's the only way we're going to get to enlightenment, is to be able to culminate our wisdom in this state of non-dual perception of reality together with this blissful energy. So we're not going to focus on that side of it as much as we're going to look at the kind of wisdom side and relate it to Arya Tara. Okay. So these are the topics I'm going to cover tonight. An introduction to Tara that's going to be very brief, just to let you know a little bit about Tara. How we can understand Tara on many different levels, at least 3 different levels we're going to discuss. And then look at this wisdom that liberates us and all beings. Talk a little bit about the wisdom realizing emptiness. That is the culmination of our wisdom component, our female energy. And then look a bit at the mantra of Green Tara, what that's all about. And then these 8 dangers or fears that are often taught and how Green Tara protects you from them. Again, they're generally correlated with many of our root delusions, our root problems. So let's introduce Tara. This word Tara in Sanskrit actually means star, like a guiding star that you would have if you're a navigator out on the ocean or something. Like I use the North Star, I think, a lot for that. So we have this star. So essentially, it's from a root that means to guide across, thus showing that she has this liberating activity, that she's able to take us across the ocean of samsara to the shores of nirvana, of Buddhahood, and what have you. Again, we often refer to her then as Tara the Liberator. And so again, it's not to say when we use this word liberator, we're not saying that simply by making prayers to Tara, praises to Tara, what have you, that we're going to be liberated by her. Buddhists don't have the ability to liberate us from their own side. I mentioned earlier that from the side of the Buddha, you have great power, great potential to help sentient beings. But nonetheless, they can't take sentient beings from an unenlightened state to an enlightened state simply through their compassionate motivation alone. They have to be able to guide us through the wisdom that will help us to accomplish that, right? And there's that one saying that I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit about where the Buddha himself said, that Buddhists don't kind of remove suffering like you would take a thorn out of a hand, and they don't wash away all of your delusions in the way that you would wash dirt out of a cloth. And they also can't take their realizations and plant them in the minds of other beings. So the question then is, well, then how do Buddhas benefit others? By teaching the Dharma. And of course, the main Dharma, the Dharma jewel, is the wisdom realizing emptiness and the cessations of these delusions and afflictions that we can have by virtue of that wisdom. So that's the main, way that we are guided and liberated. So when we talk about Tara being this sort of star that guides us across the ocean of samsara to the shores of nirvana, it's not to say that she's going to do that just through her thoughts alone. We obviously need a lot more than that. So Tara in general symbolizes the awakened activity of the Buddhas. So we all know that there are many different Buddhas. Here in the Gompa, we have a number of these tankas paintings and different statues. We have Manjushri, who symbolizes kind of a male side of that energy. We have Chenrezig or Avalokiteshvara, who symbolizes compassion. We have many different Buddhas symbolizing different components of the enlightened experience, if you will, a Buddha's experience. But there's none of them that have more qualities of one than the other. They are all equal in their qualities. It's just we use these Buddhas as a template to help us to actualize those aspects of enlightenment in ourselves. So what we're doing with Tara is we're talking about the awakened activity of the Buddhas. It's kind of interesting. I mean, even though I've focused earlier about how male energy is more outward, external, and working with activity, whereas the feminine energy is a bit more contained, Tara has both components to her, as we'll see when we take a look at her. She's kind of in both places with everything very much in balance, but she's coming from a place of that deep wisdom. And so when one has an enlightened activity or awakened activity, then all of one's actions are perfect. We do everything in alignment with that perfect wisdom. And so again, there are no faults from the side of the Buddha. If we aren't benefited by Tara and her awakened activity, then the fault is on our side. We're simply not in the best position to have that guidance. Know that there are many different versions of Tara, forms of Tara. I think there's actually a new book coming out from Wisdom about red Tara, which is not one we see in the Gelugpa tradition so much. But most of you have heard of white Tara. White Tara initiations are often given around long life. And so she has a manifestation of herself where she is bestowing long life, helping beings to be free of any obstacles that might arise in terms of shortening their life. But in the case of green Tara, there's this idea that she's in particular eliminating obstacles in general, especially obstacles we have on our path, and also bringing success. She has that kind of connotation to her. I'm going to take it off screen for a minute just to tell you a little story about when I went to the master's program. Venerable Rabina was teaching in San Francisco, and she was asking me, this was in 1997, before I went to the program in the beginning of 1998. And she said to me, well, Don, you're getting all ready and everything. And I said, yes. She said, but have you asked for any practices that you might need to do in order to have success? And I was like, no, what do I know about these things? So she directed me in particular, I think it was Geshe Lama Kunchuk that she directed me to, amazing Lama at Kopan Monastery. And so I wrote a little message to the nun there that gets the messages to Geshe Lama Kunchuk, asking for, are there any specific things I should do, practices I should do, or pujas I should have done, or whatever. And I simply get back this message saying, if you recite the praises to Tara, which are the 21 Taras, the green Tara emanations, if you recite that every day 3 times, have no problems. Well, not no problems, but he was saying essentially, this is how you can be assured of having success in your studies. So I started reciting it then. As soon as I got it, of course, I didn't know it, and learned it in Tibetan. I had a little recording of one Lama saying it in Tibetan. And, it's really a wonderful thing to memorize and to know. You can recite the English version of it. I'm sure you guys have done it here with pujas, the Tara Puja and what have you. But I find the Tibetan to be really very powerful. And I mean, I'm not saying I had no problems during the 7 years, but I'm here. So I can, kind of give credit where credit's due, give it to Tara, because certainly it helped me on my path. And I continue to do those praises every day. And of course, I have a practice of green Tara that I do every day as well. That's a little introduction to green Tara. Let's talk a little bit more about how we can see Tara as, how do we relate to her? How do we understand her? The very first one is certainly as a person or a historical figure. And again, we're not saying that you can absolutely track this back and you can find in the history book somewhere some person who became the Buddha that we know of as Tara, but nonetheless, there is a story that goes with Tara and with her kind of being in this world. There are actually two versions of this story. I'm going to read a little bit from Venerable Tipton Chodron. She had some initial teachings that eventually became a book called How to Free Your Mind. How to Free Your Mind by, again, Tipton Chodron. And it's a wonderful book. It's all about Arya Tara and about practicing Tara. And this is the story that she relates there. She says, many eons ago, in a different universe, far, far away, no, it doesn't say that, but a princess named Yeshe Dawa lived. Based on her own investigation and experience, she came to have great confidence in the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. She understood the unsatisfactory nature of existence and thus determined to be free from all sufferings. Thinking that all living beings were like her and wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, Princess Yeshe Dawa developed genuine impartial love and compassion for each and every living being. And of course, bodhicitta, that comes from that. She was not enchanted by the luxuries of palace life. Instead, she vowed to show the way to liberation to millions of beings. Each day before, I'm sorry, I should continue that. Millions of beings each day before eating breakfast, to millions more before eating lunch, and to even more before going to sleep at night. Because of this, she was called Arya Tara, meaning the noble liberator. Arya indicates that she had already directly realized the nature of reality. This is a term that we often use for the Four Noble Truths, the Arya Truths. It means that beings who have directly realized emptiness have a different discernment of those. So if we say somebody is an Arya, that means that they have that wisdom. So again, when religious authorities suggested that she pray to be born a man in the future lives, Tara refused, pointing out that many Buddhas had already manifested in male bodies and vowing to attain full awakening in a woman's body and continuously return in female form in order to benefit others. So, I mean, those of you, again, who come to Buddhist centers and seen all the iconography at Tibetan centers in particular, do see a preponderance of male Buddhas, right? Once more, the patriarchal energy that's in this world system, at least, that has resulted in that being the predominant view of kind of what an enlightened form looks like. And there even are some kind of references in some of our Lam Rim texts sometimes to the ideal body being a male body. But it's not to be seen in strict terms in regard to male, female. It's in terms of whether one has the situation where one has the independence and freedom to do what one needs to do. And unfortunately, in our world, we still have many cultures where women don't have that, right? They lack that freedom. One contemporary Lama rephrased this kind of aspect of making prayers that we be born with a good independence and the ability to make our own decisions and choices and what have you. I mean, we are empowered when we have that. If we're under the, related to someone recently about how my mother, after my father died at 70, someone asked my mother, well, aren't you going to get married again? Well, you're still young. And she says, there's no way I want to be controlled by another man. That was her experience of marriage. And many cultures have that, right? Where there's a controlling influence of the men over women. So when we talk about that sort of idea, again, Arya Tara as Yeshe Dawa had to contend with that, with people saying, well, you need to be born a man so you can be a monk and have the freedom to live your life and do all these things, because in most societies, women lack that. So it's not saying, again, that we're bought into that and that's the way it has to be. We're saying that simply that's an observation about how it often is in our cultures. So Yeshe Dawa said, to hell with you, I'm going to become a Buddha as a woman. And I'm going to keep being reborn as a woman until that actually happened. So how wonderful, we have her as an example of kind of being able to show that it's completely possible. It's not that we have to be buying into some concept of male forms only being Buddhas. So again, as she says, be we men or women, this historical Tara is a role model for us. Just like us, she was once an ordinary being with problems, stress, and disturbing emotions, but by training her mind in the Buddhist teaching, she attained full awakening. And likewise, we can do the same. The other legend, very briefly, is that Tara is said to also have been born from Avalokiteshvara's tear. I just mentioned Avalokiteshvara, he's the Buddha of compassion. And the story is that essentially when Avalokiteshvara was trying to liberate beings, he saw that as soon as he'd liberate one realm, that beings would flock into that realm as soon as he turned his attention elsewhere. And so the realm of samsara is vast, the number of beings are vast. And he actually cried that he couldn't liberate all of them. And Tara came and appeared out of his tear and said, I will help you. It's kind of interesting because if you go back to the male-female dynamic, right, we have the compassionate motivation of Avalokiteshvara that's wanting to get out there and do the work, right? I want to liberate all these beings. I want to go to the hell realms. I want to do all these things. But then you need the tear of compassion manifesting as that wisdom, the feminine side, that will then give you the technique by which you can help others to achieve that. So although we are often equating wisdom primarily to the wisdom realizing emptiness, there are other wisdom teachings that the Buddha gave as well, right? The wisdom of knowing the law of cause and effect, karma. The wisdom of knowing how things manifest within cyclic existence, rebirth, what have you, death. All of those wisdom aspects of it need to be disseminated to sentient beings, wherever they're at in their path. You don't just teach everyone emptiness, you teach them what they need in terms of wisdom teachings that will help them at that time, all right? So that's the second story. Let's go back to the slides and just introduce what we're doing here on this second aspect, second way of understanding Tara. And this is as a manifestation of enlightened qualities. So when we see this being that we call Green Tara, the very elements within her being signify certain aspects of the enlightened state, enlightened qualities. Let's take a look at some of these. First, a little introduction from Venerable Children. Tara is an emanation of bliss and emptiness. Again, we talked about that earlier. This is the tantric perspective. She is bliss and emptiness kind of symbolically put together before us. Within the sphere of emptiness, the absence of inherent existence, again, I'll talk about that shortly, blissful wisdom realizing emptiness appears in the form of Tara. All right, that's what we're doing in our tantric practice before you become a Buddha even. But when you are a Buddha, then that wisdom realizing emptiness that is together with bliss appears in various forms. By appearing in this physical form of Tara, the wisdom of bliss and emptiness of all Buddhas inspires us to cultivate constructive attitudes and actions, because her very being symbolizes all of that, as we're going to see. By understanding the symbolic meaning of Tara's physical characteristics, we gain confidence in and are moved to follow the path she teaches, generating her qualities within ourselves. Because why else would we have this mirror of all these amazing qualities and use it on our path if we're not going to try to generate the same qualities? I mean, it's kind of interesting if you look at like just in everyday life, little kids, like maybe you have a young girl who puts pictures of great gymnasts, female gymnasts that she really idolizes on her wall because she's practicing gymnastics and wants to become like those great gymnasts, right? So it's a similar type thing. If we see somebody who embodies the qualities that we want, then we try to use that as a template for understanding our own potential to achieve them. If we think about the qualities of a Buddha, how would those qualities look if they appeared in color, shape, and form? Even though all Buddhas have the same internal traits and qualities, they do appear in different manifestations, as I said earlier, to emphasize certain characteristics. Again, Green Tara being the emphasis on the enlightened activities of the Buddhas. So this is the Thangka image that I'm going to use for this. I actually decided to use this one rather than the one I was using because sometime not that long ago, somebody posted this on the internet on Facebook. This is an image of Green Tara that Kadrola, this wonderful Dakini woman who's been helping out Rinpoche a lot. She gave this to Lama Zopa Rinpoche as a present. And this is Green Tara, obviously. Just so you know, the beings in there up in the upper left-hand corner is Avalokiteshvara in a four-armed form. Then on top of Green Tara is Amitabha Buddha, the red Buddha there. And then off to the right, her left, is seeing it right. Oh, Guru Rinpoche. It's kind of blocked a little bit of his face there. Guru Rinpoche is Padmasambhava, and there's a lot of connection between Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, and Green Tara. Down below are the three long life deities: Amitayas, the red Buddha, and then White Tara in the middle, and then Ushnisha Vijaya or Namgyalma. Those three are often used together in terms of long life. And since there's such a strong connection between White Tara and Green Tara, those are on the Thangka there. And of course, when one puts those on a Thangka for a Lama, it's to make the aspiration for the long life of that Lama. But anyway, that's enough of that. Let's take a look at the form of Tara that is here in front of you. First of all, the fact that it's female is already symbolizing the wisdom aspect. Because once more, even though we're talking about enlightened activity, where does that activity come from? It comes from wisdom. This is why Aryatara will always work perfectly for beings, is because it's not just pure male energy of doing things in the world without that wisdom. It's coming from that place of wisdom, deeply seated and rooted in wisdom. Her green color symbolizes activity and success. We use green often, as we have in our world, as it showing like growth and things coming to fruition. We have lots of green down here in Florida, right, due to all the moisture and everything. Fortunately, Santa Fe's been getting greener with the rains we had this summer, but oftentimes it's very, very brown, not so green. But green signifies that kind of everything coming together and producing all kinds of things. So that's what this energy is as well. It's like from that place of wisdom, everything flourishes. Body posture expresses her inner realizations and outer activities. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but you'll notice that she's sitting with her left leg drawn in, right? And then she has her right leg extended. That's kind of this balancing between the two energies, right? She's got the inner realizations that she's keeping contained within her through her force of her left leg withdrawn, her inside, and then her right leg is drawn out so that she can be of benefit to others and accomplish those enlightened activities from that place of perfect wisdom. Okay. The hand mudras, the mudras of granting supreme realizations with the right and the three jewels with the left. So granting supreme realizations, I think it's with the two fingers together like this, but it's over the right knee. And so she's kind of putting her hand forward to grant these supreme realizations. That mudra shows that we can attain such realizations by following the path that Tara and all the Buddhists teach, and also that Tara will generously help us to do so. That's why, again, praying to Tara is really valuable, because you kind of create that connection with this sort of force that will help you to flourish and grow and have success, to have these supreme realizations. On the other side, she has the mudra of the three jewels. You notice there are three fingers up and then the two fingers together here. You put your ring finger and your thumb together. These three represent the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the three jewels. And then the coming together of the ring finger and the thumb represent the union of compassion and wisdom. Again, the method and wisdom sides of the path. So once more, it says that if we entrust ourselves to the three jewels, then we will have this. Again, both of these mudras together give us kind of a full view of what the potential of Tara is to help us on our path and what we have to do. Because again, Tara doesn't liberate us from her own side, liberates us by our, following the path, by our entrusting ourselves to the three jewels and so on. So again, Amitabha in this tanka is abiding on her crown. Amitabha is representing the guru. It shows the importance of following a fully qualified, wise, and compassionate spiritual guide. Again, you can't see Amitabha's face, but he's usually smiling and peaceful. He's sort of the patriarch of the Lotus family, the Padma family, and Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara is also in that family, as well as Green Tara and so on. So it shows that, again, we want to be ever mindful of the teachings that we receive from our guides and continue to practice in line with what our guides have, the advice they've given us and so on. Okay. Then there are lotuses in each hand. You'll notice that I think they're the red lotuses that are on either side. I think they're red in this. Sometimes they're different colors though, like a blue and what have you. But she's holding a stem of the lotus here in this with the three jewels mudra, and then with the other one, she's holding a stem with her finger or index finger and her thumb, while the other fingers are extended down for the realization. So she's holding those, and they symbolize purity and power, which we can say are also aspects of full enlightenment, right? You need to completely purify oneself, and you need to then generate the power that allows you to benefit others. Again, that going forward with her right foot, ready to come to the aid of beings. And also represents the development into Buddhahood, because if you look at how a lotus develops, it starts with a bud. Of course, the stem comes up. Remember the analogy of the mud and the lotus. So from the mud, the lotus comes up in a bud, and then the bud begins to open, and then it fully blossoms. It's fully open. And of course, it's pure. It's unsullied by the mud in the process of doing that. So this kind of shows our own path of how we begin as sort of a bud, Buddha nature, and then we eventually continue to open and open until we're fully open. But unlike, of course, a lotus flower, a Buddha doesn't wilt and die away. A Buddha continues to be in the world from that perfect place. You'll notice she has many ornaments on, jeweled necklaces, armlets, anklets, earrings, crown. These all indicate that the six perfections are integrated fully into her being and that they adorn every activity. So again, these kind of individually are correlated to some degree with the perfections, but recall those perfections are generosity, morality, patience, joyous effort or enthusiasm, concentration, and then finally wisdom. So she's ornamented with these perfected qualities. The outward extension of the right hand and foot, because again, her right hand is draped over her knee, emphasize compassionate activity method. Again, and her foot is off of the cushion, stepping, ready to come to the aid. Inward drawing of the left hand and foot closer to her, because again, the mudra of the three jewels is kind of right here at the heart. And so she's kind of drawing that in and her left leg in. That indicates her inner peace gained through realizing emptiness, the wisdom side. So anytime you see Tara, you should have all these kinds of ideas in mind about what you're seeing. It's not just this beautiful green female Buddha. It's got many different aspects to it. When we visualize Tara, we aren't just visualizing the external as well. We often, when we're working with Buddha images, we think about the three places of their body, the crown chakra, the throat chakra, and the heart chakra, being adorned with these three syllables, Om, Ah, and Hum. And in fact, these are the syllables used when we want to bless something, consecrate something. If you're, before you eat your food, it's good to recite Om, Ah, Hum 3 times. These three syllables embody respectively a Buddha's physical, verbal, and mental faculties. So again, Om through the crown represents physical, Ah at the throat represents verbal, and then Hum at the heart represents mental. They also represent respectively the Sangha, Dharma, and Buddha. Kind of go in reverse order to what we normally say, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Because Sangha is the embodiment, the body, Dharma is the speech, and Buddha is the mind. Okay. These syllables serve as subtle objects upon which a meditator may focus. They also remind us of the qualities we are developing within ourselves as a result of practicing the Buddha's teaching, right? We're trying to perfect our minds, our speech, our bodies. In this way, each characteristic of Tara's form illustrates the path to Buddhahood and its resultant qualities. So as I said, every time we see an image of Tara, we should be thinking in terms of this, that this is what it represents, is all the culmination of these amazing qualities that are embodied within a Buddha. You know, the union of those two energies, and especially, again, the place of wisdom that she is seated from, for her to be able to come to our aid. Now, the third way that we can understand Tara, as it says here, is as our Buddha potential in its fully evolved state. This is where we get into the idea that this can be used as your own template for your practice of becoming a Buddha. As I said earlier, it does require tantric empowerment. There's generally, they say you don't have permission to do this, but it's not really so effective if you visualize yourself as Tara without the empowerment. The empowerment with a qualified Lama helps to kind of awaken the seeds for this all to happen. But in tantric practice, what happens is people use that as a template to see themselves as Aryatara. That's what I was saying earlier, is deity yoga. Of course, you don't just bring it up in your imagination without any sort of other meditation. You arise from within emptiness. So you understand the empty nature of all things, the wisdom realizing emptiness, and that wisdom realizing emptiness, together with, again, whatever blissful state of mind you can conjure up, becomes Aryatara. And you do your practice from that vantage point. And you recite the mantras and do the visualizations from that place of holding that that is your Buddha potential in its fully evolved state. This is why Tantra is often called the resultant path. If we look at Sutra, it's very much about, I need to do all these things, and then I eventually get to a place where I'm enlightened. Tantra is about, I'm going to think I'm enlightened right now. I'm just going to go for it and think I'm Aryatara and just, I'm a fully enlightened being and everything around me is pure and I'm in this purified state already. It's a very powerful way to go about collecting merit. So Venerable Chodron says, our extremely subtle mind and body have the potential to transform into the fully enlightened body and mind of a Buddha. When we visualize Tara and regard her as the result of Tara that we will become, and especially if we visualize ourselves in deity yoga, we are inspired to train our mind in the path leading us to this result. So again, those of you who don't have tantric empowerment, then just when you're observing Tara, think that that is what you can achieve. You can be Tara. We all have Tara potential. We all have Chenrezig potential. We all have Manjushri potential. And when you become enlightened, it's not like you're fixed in that form, because you will manifest in whatever form is needed for whatever being, because you have all the qualities. Every Buddha has all the same qualities as Tara in terms of enlightened activity. They have all the same, compassionate qualities as Chenrezig and what have you. But this is what we can see when we look at Arya Tara, is that that's our Buddha potential in terms of what we can become. So that's maybe enough on that. The third topic to cover around Tara is just to briefly touch on the wisdom that liberates us and all beings. This is the wisdom realizing emptiness. So again, what the Buddha says is that essentially every one of us is obscured from realizing our potential primarily by an ignorance. And this form of ignorance is the ignorance that holds that we ourselves primarily, as well as all phenomena, everything that exists independently, concretely, on its own, self-established. And I've touched on this already once or twice in teachings here already, but it's a very profound concept and a very difficult one to realize. But what essentially the Buddha says is you can, through your own reasoning mind, through that kind of logical approach to things, you can realize that wisdom. And all you have to do is engage in these particular techniques of analyzing. Kind of get clear about what it is that we're trying to negate, the false sense of self that we're clinging to, which again, they say you can conjure up by thinking about times when that self is felt very prominent in our minds. Oftentimes, if we've been falsely accused, somebody says, oh, you're the one that did that. I think you did that. And you're like, no, I didn't do it at all, right? You have a strong defense, like, no, it's not me. It's like the me becomes much more concrete, seeming much more independent, standing on its own, self-established. Once we get clear about what that looks like, then we try to determine if it exists. And one of the basic techniques is to then take a look to see if you can find something that is equivalent to it. If it does exist in reality, we should be able to point to something and say, ah, there it is. What we find is if we investigate this collection of stuff that we tend to think that this I, this solid sense of I, is together with, we don't find anything that is exactly equivalent to it. We might look at the body and pick it apart, and is it the heart? Is it the brain? Is it the head? We go through all the various parts of the body. We might even think it's the body in totality, but the body in totality is a combination of all these parts, so it becomes a little strained. And we might look at the mind and we think that some aspect of the mind is the real self. But what aspect of the mind is the real self? Is it our thoughts? Is it our emotions? Is it, our wisdom? Is it our anger? Where do we find this real I? We go looking for that real I, that strong sense of this I that seems so self-supporting, so self-existent. We don't find anything that is equivalent to it. On this basis, this mind and body that are sitting here on this cushion or chair, wherever you're seated. You still exist, but you really only exist very slightly, in a very subtle way, because the I can't be found here. Of course, you also have to look if the I could exist somewhere apart from all of this. That was kind of the Vedic traditions still are adhering to this kind of sense of what they call an Atman, a soul. And according to the Buddhist perspective, what is that Atman? If you're going to say that it exists, we have to point to something that is it. But just like we can talk about our consciousness we can't point to as a physical phenomenon, but we can experience it, right? We're experiencing it every moment. We can know what conscious awareness is, that it is the doorway through which we have our five senses and our mental consciousness and what have you. And we have our body, our physical bodies that we can certainly point to and we can look at and we can say, oh, this is, something I can identify as my body. So again, where is the soul? Where is the Atman? What is it that you can point to that's part of our being that is this kind of eternal soul? I think it's a little similar to what we might call a soul in the Christian traditions. I certainly grew up with that, being Roman Catholic when I was raised. The idea that I had an immortal soul that would be reunited with God in heaven, if I was a good boy. And If I wasn't, then it would end up in eternal damnation or what have you. So the Buddha is not down on all these things for no reason. He's just simply saying, from a Buddhist perspective, we don't find such a phenomenon. But you might consider Atman or soul, that this doesn't exist. There is this eternal phenomenon that is our consciousness. It is the thread running through all of our existences. But it's not equivalent to a soul. It's a consciousness. It knows. It's aware of things. So again, this might become a whole debate if people were really proficient in talking about, those Vedic traditions. But nonetheless, this is one level of denying of the self, but this is a deeper error that we're making. This is something we've had since beginningless time. We really think there's a real I here. We really think that everything around us is real in that way. And we have to overcome that wisdom. So I just want to talk a little bit about that. Obviously, it's a huge topic. I did some teachings for all of you last fall, I think it was, on the Heart Sutra. Wasn't it last fall? I think it was. Yeah, but it's good to study emptiness and study with very qualified people who realized it, unlike me, who just really can talk about it a bit. But the mantra of green tar, I think it's important just to go over this real quickly, and then we're going to talk briefly about these 8 dangers to wrap things up today. Om Tare, Tutare, Ture, Soha, or Swaha, it sometimes is pronounced. Let's talk about each of these. Om, in this case, even though we talk about Om Ahung earlier as being enlightened body, speech, and mind, when it's in a mantra, usually the syllable Om says it encompasses all 3 of those. This is because in the Sanskrit, the word Om is signified by the root, which is an Ah. It gets a little mark on it that makes it an O sound, and then it gets a suffix that's a Ma sound. So you have 3 components. You have O, Om. Those are united together. So you have 3 aspects that become the enlightened body, speech, and mind of the Buddhas. And so when we start the mantra with Om, it's kind of signifying, we're putting that kind of as a blessing, a way of indicating that this is the speech of the Buddhas, the embodiment of the speech of the Buddhas. Tare tu tare turi. There's different ways of talking about this, but they all have the meaning essentially of to liberate. Remember, we talked about Tara the liberator earlier. In one interpretation, these 3 are referring to liberation from the obstacles to generating the paths of what are referred to as the 3 levels of practitioner: the lesser capable being, middling capable being, and great capable being. Most of you know this from your Lam Rim studies. The first is like the beginning of our path, where we mostly study karma and aim to get a good rebirth. The second level is where we study the 4 Noble Truths and the perspective of cyclic existence, samsara, and primarily achieve or want to achieve liberation for ourselves. That's the main motivation at that level. The third level, the great capable being, is the bodhisattva, the being who wants to become a Buddha for the sake of others, not just achieve their own liberation. So again, we have obstacles to realizing those things. Every one of us, so we want Tara through Tare tu Tare Ture to liberate us from the obstacles to the lesser, middling, and great paths with regard to these different capacities, different capabilities. That's one interpretation. In another, they refer to banishing the obstructions to generating the realizations of what are called the 3 principal aspects of the path. Renunciation, which is a key concept of turning away from samsara and suffering and turning towards liberation. Bodhicitta, which we've already talked about, the wisdom or the mind that is intent upon achieving Buddhahood for the sake of others. And then finally, the correct view of emptiness. So when we say Tare tu Tare Ture, we can think about that. Another third interpretation, we can say that these 3 words correspond to 3 levels of liberation, and also indirectly to the 4 Noble Truths. And let me put on the screen how that is. Here, we say Tare means to liberate from suffering, which, as you know, if you've studied the 4 Noble Truths, that's the first Noble Truth, right? Dukkha, or suffering. So Tare means I'm going to, through the force of Tara, be liberated from my suffering. Tu Tare means liberating from what we're going to discuss shortly, the 8 dangers, which are all, again, revolving around delusion. Delusions are one of the main causes of our suffering, right? That's the second Noble Truth. So not only do we want to be liberated from the suffering, we want to be liberated from the causes of our suffering, all the deluded states of mind. Ture means being liberated from disease. And what is the worst disease we have? The disease of ignorance. third noble truth is indirectly signified here because that's the truth of cessation, that there can be a cessation to all of what obscures the mind. All disease, especially the ignorance that has caused us to be in samsara since beginningless time. And all of that is arrived at through practicing the fourth noble truth path. So that's kind of, again, there indirectly. But essentially it means 3 levels of suffering that I can be liberated from. The suffering, the grosser forms of suffering, the delusions themselves that cause it, and then finally the root delusion, the disease that is plaguing all sentient beings. So then finally the last bit, swaha, may this happen. You're kind of saying, these 3 levels of liberation, or 3 types of liberation, 3 obscurations you want to be liberated from, may this happen. So you're kind of invoking Tara to be a force for that wisdom energy to liberate you from all of these. Because again, it's primarily wisdom through which all of these will be removed, not to deny that the compassion side also plays a role. Okay, now again, I don't have too much time, but I'm going to go through these 8 dangers and how green Tara protects you from them. And we won't have time to do, justice to all of these. But know that each of these, are obstacles on the path. There's something that we do see in our own minds that we do have to contend with. They also have both external and internal aspects in terms of how they're presented. External ones might threaten our life or our property. And internal ones might endanger us spiritually. We're mostly concerned about the internal ones, but nonetheless, they're presented with the external as well. So how does green Tara protect you from them? Depending on Tara's wisdom by which she guides you, you liberate yourself from these. Again, don't think, I grew up again Catholic. I had this strong feeling like if I prayed to God strong enough, God would come and save me from all these horrible things or whatever. That's not exactly how this works. It's like you align yourself with Tara's energy and be attentive to the wisdom that she is teaching you, guiding you with, and you liberate yourself. While we can ask Tara to save us from these dangers, we are actually calling upon our inner Tara, the seeds of our own wisdom and compassion. First, we practice the temporal antidotes for each of them, and then the ultimate antidote of the wisdom realizing emptiness. Again, I won't have time to go into all of these in detail, but these are taught by the Buddha to help us reduce and eventually eliminate all of these various delusions. The real protection then, keep in mind, is the Dharma, which, as I said, are the true paths that are realizations of emptiness and the true cessations that occur on the basis of those. So this is how we actually are liberated. Again, Tara doesn't come in and take us away on some magic carpet somewhere or something. So the following verses are from this text called The Crown Ornament for the Wise, a hymn to Tara. It was composed by the very first Dalai Lama after he had completed a meditation retreat on Tara. First of all, there's the lion of pride. Remember, there's the external aspect of the lion, and then there's the internal aspect of pride. Dwelling in the mountains of wrong views of selfhood, puffed up with holding itself superior, it claws other beings with contempt. The lion of pride, please protect us from this danger. So this is the first one that Tara liberates us from, again, at an ultimate level by realizing the emptiness of the I that we're conflating with our pride, inflating with our pride. But also we can combat our pride by thinking about all the things that we don't know and the fact that we're still not realized beings, and admiring the qualities of others as well. That helps. The elephant of ignorance, not tamed by the sharp hooks of mindfulness and vigilance, dulled by the maddening liquor of sensual pleasures, it enters wrong paths and shows its harmful tusks. The elephant of ignorance, please protect us from this danger. We might not equate this completely to that subtle level of ignorance that we were talking about earlier. We have different levels of ignorance, but when our mind is under the control of ignorance, we lack our mindfulness and vigilance, and we end up doing a lot of things, getting intoxicated by all the various sense pleasures that we can experience. It moves us in wrong directions. So be aware that here we're calling that an elephant, because an elephant will kind of trample all over sorts of things out of its kind of ignorance and stupidity and what have you, its dullness. So becomes a very dangerous animal from that place. Just like the lion is sort of the pride of the jungle, what have you. The fire of anger. Oh, I'm sorry, how do we get rid of our ignorance? Through study and through developing a deep wisdom, especially, studying the teachings on emptiness. The fire of anger. driven by the wind of inappropriate attention, billowing forth swirling smoke clouds of misconduct. It has the power to burn down forests of goodness. The fire of anger, please protect us from this danger. We often use this for as an analogy for anger. Kind of burns up all of your merit and it destroys relationships. And how many of us have, probably every one of us, ruined some relationship at some point by having an angry episode and then never talking to that person again? Or even maybe if we were able to talk to them again, it was hard to heal that relationship completely. Many techniques to combat anger. Maybe one of the primary ones is to have compassion and kindness towards those who upset us and cause us difficulties, because we see that they're suffering just like us. We have to find some techniques for generating compassion or patience, developing a much stronger mind in the presence of those sorts of things. Wonderful book, and again by Thupten Chodron, called Healing Anger, is wonderful to go into techniques around that. Snake of jealousy. Why is it jealousy a snake? Because it poisons so many of our relationships, right? If we can't kind of take delight in others' good accomplishments, lurking in its dark pit of ignorance, unable to bear the wealth and excellence of others, it swiftly injects them with its cruel poison. The snake of jealousy. Please protect us from this danger. Of course, how do we overcome our jealousy? Rejoice in others' good fortune. If you see other people who have wonderful things in their lives, be happy for them. How did they get those wonderful things? From a karmic perspective, they only got them through practicing virtue. We look at millionaires, billionaires, zillionaires, whatever is in this world, we see them and we might be really kind of jealous of them and think, oh, they don't deserve that at all. Well, they created the karma for that, or they wouldn't have it. Again, what they're doing with it might be of some issue. Maybe they aren't helping others and what have you. We can maybe make some commentary on that, but not, recognize that that doesn't come with it. You get all this karma ripening and wealth. It doesn't necessarily happen that everybody's generous and kind, but we should be absolutely, not jealous of them. Rejoice in their good fortune. The thieves of wrong views. Here it says, roaming the fearful wilds of inferior practice and the barren wastes of absolutism and nihilism, they sack the towns and hermitages of benefit and bliss. The thieves of wrong views, please protect us from this danger. If we hold wrong views, especially the two that are mentioned here, absolutism, where we think everything exists in that concrete way that we were talking about earlier, or if we start studying emptiness and we think things don't exist at all, we fall into a nihilistic point of view. And there are many other different types of wrong views. Then they're thieves. They steal the value of this life. We end up kind of being dedicated to wrong views and don't actually cultivate the wisdom that we need to in this life. The chain, of course, and how do you overcome that? Once more, studying emptiness teachings, particularly the middle way, that gives you that kind of perspective between those two extremes. The chain, or kind of the bonds of miserliness, binding embodied beings in the unbearable prison of psychic existence with no freedom, it locks them in craving's tight embrace. The chain of miserliness, please protect us from this danger. Miserliness is generated from our attachment, but miserliness goes further in saying, and I'm not gonna share what I have with others. I'm not gonna allow myself to be, that generous with what I possess. Well, it becomes a chain of ourselves. When we hold on to everything that we have, we are enchained by it ourselves. It doesn't allow us to grow or develop, and of course it becomes very problematic because we don't do anything with those resources. The only reason to have resources in your life is to benefit others. Of course, we have to take care of ourselves, have enough food to eat, and what have you. But the main reason to have resources is so that we can use them to benefit others. At least hold the motivation of benefiting others when we're spending money on things we need for ourselves. So again, we overcome it through that type of mindset, having the mind that wishes to be generous with our resources. Number 7, getting there. The flood of attachment. Well, attachment does feel like a flood sometimes. It just kind of comes over us and we get sort of stuck in it, right? Sweeping us in the torrent of psychic existence so hard to cross, where, conditioned by the propelling winds of karma, we are tossed in the waves of birth, aging, and sickness and death. The flood of attachment. Please protect us from this danger. As I said, miserliness comes from attachment, but attachment is kind of the beginning point where we have this clinging to ourselves, to what we need in this life, to the things that we have, even to our own wisdom. Sometimes we aren't even generous with our wisdom with others. How do we get rid of that attachment? By seeing the faults of attachment and seeing impermanence, that everything that we are clinging to with a mind of attachment, we're going to have to let go of eventually. Just meditating on that fact, that all of this stuff we've accumulated, we're going to have to leave it all behind. You can't take a penny with you. So it's a very powerful antidote to that. As I said, for all of these, the wisdom realizing emptiness is what gets rid of them in a more final mode. The carnivorous demon of doubt. Doubt here, not just talking about healthy doubt that we might have about teachings, which is a good beginning point, but an afflicted doubt where we feel like we can't move forward because we're doubting the teachings too much, that it's not allowing us to engage in them fully. So here the little verse written by the first Dalai Lama says, roaming in the space of darkest confusion, tormenting those who strive for ultimate aims, it is viciously lethal to liberation. The carnivorous demon of doubt, please protect us from this danger. How do you alleviate your doubt? And why it's called a carnivorous demon is that it kind of, again, sort of takes over and kind of destroys everything that you have, because you have this perfect opportunity in this human life to make some progress in your development of wisdom. And just like with wrong views, if your doubt obscures that potential, keeps you from moving forward, then it's like it's a carnivorous demon. It becomes your own mind, sort of taking your life force, what have you. How do you overcome doubt? Again, through more serious study, really analyzing things, trying to do what you can to overcome whatever doubts you might have about the Buddha's teachings. And again, some level of doubt is healthy. I mean, if people didn't come in and to Buddhist teachings and question what they were being told, then there'd be something wrong, right? They'd be just kind of following by pure faith without any investigation, and they never really integrate the teaching. Do use your reasoning mind, but recognize when doubt arises in that way. Then there's a little dedication verse that comes there. Through these praises and requests to you, quell conditions unfavorable for Dharma practice, and let us have long life, positive potential, glory and plenty, and other conducive conditions as we wish. So again, when we talk about all of these sorts of, things with regard to Tara and beseeching Tara to be active in our lives, we're not talking about her coming in and doing all this. We invite in that wisdom that helps you to see exactly how to work with these dangers, exactly how to work with your own crazy mind. That's how we actually are liberated, is by using exactly the guiding force that she's giving us, that star that is Tara, that helps us to achieve all of these realizations. Just to close tonight, I want to share two little things that one of them was mentioned earlier, but some concluding advice from Venerable Chodron. Uniting our requests with the wisdom of emptiness of the three spheres, this is how we make it a practice that does keep getting us back in touch with that deepest level of wisdom that Tara represents. So when we say the three spheres, we mean myself as the person who is practicing, the actual act that I'm engaging in, and then the object of that act. So if I'm talking about practicing patience, then it's myself as the patience practitioner, the patience I'm generating, being patient in my mind, and the person that I'm being patient towards, they all are empty of inherent existence. That way I bring that wisdom realizing emptiness into my practice of patience and so on. That will help you to overcome your anger at two levels, through the conventional means as well as the more ultimate means. While requesting Tara, the second point, invoking our internal wisdom and compassion, this was said a little bit earlier. The greater our wisdom of ultimate reality, the more Tara can inspire us to deepen our realizations. Remember that with all of these, the whole role of something outside of ourselves, even when we talk about our gurus, the whole role of the gurus is to awaken the inner guru, to awaken your own innate wisdom within you, which is your own Tara potential. So we want to kind of always work with that idea of the role of all that stuff outside of us when we're visualizing Tara, working with Tara's praises, working with teachings from our own gurus. All of this is to be seen as helping us to awaken our own deepest potential in ourselves. Okay, so I know I've gone a little bit over. I apologize. I tend to do that. You all know me. So, are there any questions or comments? As it was a lot of words. Might have to go back and listen to it again. Maybe. I don't know. Any comments from those on Zoom who joined us?
just, I love what you just said about
Uh.
awakening my inner core.
Yeah.
It's really helpful,
Good,
but
good.
we forget.
Yeah, yeah. We do forget, that we have that kind of within us. Of course, our culture doesn't support this kind of concept. And, I have my view of myself when I was growing up Catholic was that I was sort of faulty from the beginning, right? We're all in the Catholic view, we all have original sin. We're all like stained right from the beginning. And so we need this external being to kind of save us from that we're all marked, And so, Buddhism is about this. It's like you need that outside, but it's to help you to remove whatever stains we have that aren't really a part of our being. We're pure inside. We just have this there, again, adventitiously. One thing I might mention on this whole idea of the outer guru is an important part of tantric practice as well, which you can practice without a tantric empowerment, is to see Tara as the same as your guru. Sometimes we even use that word like Guru Tara, or Guru Chenrezig, whatever. The idea is that that's the same energy, our gurus manifesting in these forms to help us, again, to awaken our own inner guru, our own inner potential. So, thank you. Any other comments? Questions? I know everybody, it's kind of late. Oh, you're very welcome. A little comment. So again, I hope this has given you some inspiration, and it's wonderful. You can pick up a practice of Tara. Again, there's some in the book, How to Free Your Mind, that I cited from earlier. But it's a wonderful practice to do, to kind of invoke that sort of energy with regard to what we do day in and day out, our meditation practice, any other practices we engage in. But do keep in mind that in order to do the full deity yoga and visualizations and what have you, to do what's called the sadhana, the means of accomplishment, in a real, genuine way, does require tantric empowerment. And so keep that in mind. And at some point, hopefully you'll be able to have that opportunity. Let's do a little dedication. And we can do this rather quickly. Just dedicate very strongly so that everything that we did tonight, all the words we've heard, thoughts we've had, and so on, may all of this become the cause for us to awaken our own Tara potential, to become fully enlightened in that form, and be able to benefit all sentient beings through that amazing, compassionate, enlightened activity coming from that place of deep wisdom. We pray also for the good health and long lives of all of our precious gurus, so we might continue to be guided by them to that result. And lastly, we dedicate for all those beings we're holding in our hearts we know of who are suffering, so they may be liberated from their suffering and achieve their true potential. And may all beings have that result through what we have done here tonight. Wonderful. Again, thank you all joining from home or wherever you're at. And I appreciate you being here. And thank you everyone in the golf tonight for being here. Okay. All right. Be well now.